The moment that young man leaned forward at the long folding table and said, almost casually, that the old rink was basically just an empty building nobody remembers, I felt something inside my chest tighten the way cold air tightens your lungs when you step outside too quickly in winter. It wasn't anger, not exactly. I've lived long enough to know anger is usually the easiest emotion in the room. What I felt was quieter than that. Something closer to embarrassment. Like hearing someone laugh at a story about your childhood while realizing they don't know it's yours. The meeting room at City Hall smelled faintly of burnt coffee and old carpet cleaner. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead with that tired electric hum you hear in government buildings everywhere. Outside the tall windows, the maple trees along 6th Street were already shedding their first early autumn leaves, and every once in a while the wind pushed a handful of them across the sidewalk like dry paper. Bloomington had always been a quiet town in the evenings once the university lights dimmed. That was one of the things I'd loved about it. A place where memories had time to settle. The young man speaking at the front of the room wore a charcoal blazer and thin glasses. He had a stack of glossy architectural drawings spread across the table, clean rectangles of future buildings, modern balconies, little squares representing parking spaces. Behind him, someone had pinned up a large poster board rendering of what the new apartment complex would look like. 3 stories. Brick and glass. A courtyard with decorative benches. Bike racks. Landscaping with carefully placed shrubs. It looked very efficient. Very reasonable. And very new. The property has been vacant nearly 10 years, he continued, tapping a pen against the diagram. The structure itself is outdated, and there's very little historical or economic value in preserving it. A few people nodded politely. Someone in the second row scribbled notes. I sat near the back, my coat folded across my lap, hands resting loosely over it. I'd chosen that seat on purpose. Old habit, I suppose. Floor managers spent a lot of years standing along walls, watching rather than participating. You learn a lot that way. Another planner, a woman with short dark hair, leaned forward to add something. Most residents under 40 don't even know the building exists anymore, she said. It's been boarded up so long it's practically invisible. Invisible. That word lingered in the air for a moment. I stared down at the scuffed toe of my shoe. Funny thing about invisibility. It usually arrives long before anyone notices it's there. They kept talking. Zoning adjustments. Parking ratios. Construction timelines. The kind of language that makes sense when you're building something new and don't want old stories getting in the way. None of them sounded cruel. Just practical. The way younger people often are when the past feels like something they inherited rather than something they lived. One of the investors laughed lightly at something another man said about unused nostalgia, and a few others smiled the polite smiles people give in meetings. I folded my hands together a little tighter. For a moment, I could almost hear a different sound layered beneath the hum of those fluorescent lights. The rolling whisper of skate wheels across varnished wood. Not loud. Just steady. Like rain tapping softly against a roof. That rink had stood on the edge of town since 1969. A low wooden building with tall front windows and a neon sign that used to glow red and blue on Friday nights. Bloomington Roller Palace. The sign flickered sometimes in winter when the wiring got damp, but folks didn't mind. It was bright. It was warm. And on cold Indiana evenings, warmth meant something. I spent 19 years inside that building. Not skating much myself. Mostly working. Tightening the bolts on rental skates. Changing the colored bulbs in the spinning ceiling lights. Sweeping popcorn kernels off the floor near the concession counter. making sure teenagers didn't skate too fast when the floor got crowded. Quiet work. The kind nobody writes history books about. But it was honest work. And every Saturday night that wooden floor filled with life. The speakers hung from the rafters hummed with songs that were already old even then, Buddy Holly, the Eagles, Fleetwood Mac. The records crackled sometimes when the needle hit dust. Nobody cared. Kids laughed. Couples held hands while circling slowly along the outer rail. And those colored lights spun soft circles across the polished wood like tiny galaxies drifting around the room. I watched thousands of people grow up inside that building. You don't forget something like that. At the front of the meeting room, the young developer flipped to another drawing. This aerial view shows the full redevelopment footprint, he said. A man beside him nodded. Given the condition of the structure, demolition would be the most practical route. Demolition. Another quiet word. Practical. Reasonable. Invisible. A woman from the neighborhood association raised her hand. Does anyone here actually remember the rink when it was open? She asked. The question floated across the room gently, almost as an afterthought. Several younger attendees shook their heads. Someone near the front shrugged. I think my parents mentioned it once, one student said. But it closed before I moved here. The room went quiet for a moment. Not uncomfortable. Just empty. The kind of silence that forms when history pauses long enough to see if anyone is still listening. My hands rested on my coat for a long time before I realized they had begun to tremble slightly. Age does that sometimes. Or memory. I wasn't planning to say anything. Truthfully. I had come mostly to listen. To see what the place looked like one last time in people's minds before it disappeared completely. But when the woman repeated her question, softly this time, something inside me shifted. I cleared my throat. It sounded louder than I expected in that quiet room. Several heads turned. Slowly, carefully, I stood up. My knees have never liked sudden movements these days. For a moment I just rested one hand on the back of the folding chair in front of me. The room watched politely. The way people watch older folks when they're not sure how long a story might be. I remember it, I said. My voice came out softer than I intended. The young developer smiled kindly. Oh, he said. You used to skate there? I shook my head once. No. I glanced toward the windows where the maple leaves were moving again in the wind. I worked there. That seemed to surprise them. Just a little. Evening floor manager, I added. From 73 to 92. Someone near the front leaned back slightly, interested now. 19 years condensed into one small sentence. Funny how time does that. The young man at the table folded his hands politely. Well, he said, that must have been quite a while ago. I nodded. Yes, sir. Then I looked down at the carpet for a moment, collecting the right thread of memory. Because there are thousands of nights you could talk about when you spend that long in one place. But some nights rise to the surface on their own. Like lanterns floating up through dark water. There was a snowstorm once, I said quietly. Winter of 1978. A few people shifted in their seats. Outside, the wind tapped a loose leaf against the window. The roads were nearly closed that night, I continued. Snow falling sideways. Town felt smaller than usual. I could see it clearly. The parking lot half buried in fresh white powder. The neon Rink sign glowing through drifting flakes. Funny thing was, I said, people kept showing up anyway. I paused, remembering. Families. Teenagers. Folks who just didn't want to sit home staring at the storm. The room had gone very still now. The rink was the only bright place open that night. I could almost hear it again. The door swinging open. Cold air rushing in. Snow melting off boots onto the rubber mat near the entrance. And once they stepped inside, I said, they could hear the music. The old speakers humming. Wheels rolling gently across polished wood. Colored lights drifting across the ceiling beams. And that warm smell of popcorn and floor wax. A faint smile touched the corner of my mouth. You'd be surprised what a building can hold, I said softly. Then I looked up again at the young faces across the room. And that was the night, I continued slowly, when a shy young woman in a blue sweater tried to stop too fast on the north corner of the floor. I paused there. Because even now, after all these years, I can still hear the sound her skates made when they slipped. And I can still hear the sound her skates made when they slipped. Not a loud crash. Just that quick, hollow scrape of rubber wheels losing their grip on polished wood, followed by the soft thump of someone landing more surprised than hurt. A few people at the meeting leaned forward slightly, the way folks do when a story suddenly becomes real. I rested both hands on the back of the chair in front of me and let the memory settle for a moment before continuing. She wasn't moving very fast, I said. Just trying to slow down near the corner rail. Outside the rink that night the storm had been roaring against the walls, but inside the building everything felt warm and golden. The colored lights spun slow circles across the ceiling beams, and the speakers were playing an old Eagles song that crackled softly every few seconds. I had been standing along the edge of the floor like always, watching the skaters loop around in that steady rhythm people fall into when the music carries them along. When she slipped, I stepped out onto the floor. That was part of the job. Floor managers learned to move quietly across the rink without startling anyone. I remember the way the wood felt under my shoes that night, smooth from a fresh coat of wax earlier that week. She was sitting up already when I reached her. Blue sweater, like I said. Snow still melting in little drops along the shoulders. She looked embarrassed more than anything else. "I'm so sorry," she said right away. That made me smile even then. "Sorry for what?" I told her. "Gravity?" A few quiet chuckles rippled through the meeting room when I said that. Not loud laughter. Just warm. She said she wasn't very good at skating, I continued. Her roommate had dragged her there to get out of the storm. I could still see the way the colored lights reflected off the floor around us. Red, green, soft blue. I helped her stand, steadying one elbow until she found her balance. "Take smaller steps," I told her. "Don't fight the wheels." She nodded very seriously, like someone learning an important life lesson. Then she tried again. Slowly. Carefully. One lap around the floor. Then another. Each time she passed the manager's station she gave a quick little wave to show she was still upright. That was how the night went. Snowstorm outside. Music inside. People circling the rink like planets around some quiet center of gravity. By the time the storm started easing near midnight, that shy young woman in the blue sweater had learned how to glide without looking at her feet. I paused there for a moment. The room had grown very still. No one was looking at the architectural drawings anymore. And before she left, I said, she came over to return the rental skates. I could still see her standing there at the counter, cheeks a little red from skating. "Thank you for not laughing when I fell," she told me. I shrugged. Happens to everybody the first night. Then she asked if the rink was always open on Saturdays. I told her it was. And she said she might come back. I let out a small breath through my nose. She did, I said. Nearly every weekend after that. A soft murmur passed through the room. I straightened a little, easing the weight off my hands. 2 years later, I said, I married her. That got a warmer reaction. Smiles. A quiet laugh from someone near the back. But I wasn't telling the story for the laugh. So I let the room settle again. Over the years, I continued, we watched a lot of people come through those doors. Kids who were nervous their first time on wheels. Teenagers showing off for their friends. Parents who hadn't skated since high school but gave it another try when their children begged them. On Friday nights the place echoed with music. Saturday afternoons were slower, families, birthday parties, little paper hats and balloons tied to chairs. I remembered the smell of the concession stand popcorn drifting across the rink. The faint chemical sweetness of floor wax warming under the lights. The winter wind tapping gently against those tall front windows while inside the music kept rolling. And most nights, I said quietly, I stood right along the wall. Watching. Making sure the lights kept spinning. Making sure the music didn't stop. It was ordinary work. Nothing fancy. But that building held thousands of small moments like that winter night. First dates. Apologies. Teenagers discovering the strange courage it takes to ask someone to skate the next slow song. You see, I said, looking at the young planners again, a building like that doesn't just hold walls and a roof. It holds time. A few people shifted in their seats. No one looked uncomfortable. Just thoughtful. I understand why the town wants new housing, I added gently. Bloomington's grown a lot since those days. That part was true. Progress always arrives sooner or later. You can't stop it. And you shouldn't try. I'm not here to argue about the apartments, I said. The young developer nodded slightly, listening carefully now. I just wanted you to know that the place you're talking about wasn't empty. My voice stayed steady. It was full for a long time. I glanced again toward the windows where the maple leaves were still moving in the evening breeze. And for some of us, I said softly, it still is. No one spoke for several seconds. Then the woman from the neighborhood association gave a small nod. Thank you for sharing that, she said. The meeting continued after that. They discussed timelines again. Construction permits. Parking layouts. The conversation returned to the language of development and budgets. And that was fine. I didn't expect anything to change. Sometimes stories are just meant to be told. Not to stop the future. Only to remind it where it came from. When the meeting ended, people gathered their papers and pushed back their chairs. A few younger folk stopped to shake my hand on their way out. One of them said his grandparents used to talk about the rink. Another said he wished he'd seen it when it was open. The young developer approached last. He looked thoughtful. I didn't realize, he said quietly. I smiled. That's all right. Because truthfully, he couldn't have realized. Most memories live in places long after the people who remember them stop talking. Outside, the evening air had turned cool. The maple trees rustled softly along the street as I walked toward my car. For a moment I stood there under the streetlight, looking out toward the dark edge of town where the old building still sat. Boarded windows. Faded paint. The neon sign long gone. But in my mind, the place looked different. Bright lights spinning across the floor. Music humming through old speakers. And a shy young woman in a blue sweater gliding carefully past the north corner without falling. My wife passed away 8 years ago. Cancer. quiet and patient the way those things often are. But sometimes when the house grows still late at night, I can almost hear those wheels rolling again. Soft circles across polished wood. The laughter of teenagers echoing under rafters. The faint smell of popcorn drifting through warm air. Places like that don't disappear the way people think they do. They just move. From wood and brick into the quiet corners of the people who were there. And that's all right too. Because dignity doesn't really need applause. Most of the time, it just stands quietly along the wall, keeping the lights spinning while the music plays.